These newspaper article readings are not for the faint-hearted or the squeamish. If you're at all sensitive, I might suggest these aren't for you. If in doubt, check the description below. It'll tell you which topics are covered in this particular episode. There's both human and animal suicides, and you heard that right. There's also horrific descriptions of injuries, as well as the deaths of youngsters. So don't do it to yourself if you're prone to nightmares, is all I'll say right now. Not all the articles are horrible. Some of them are uplifting, some of them show incredible bravery and heroism. There are near misses. So these were picked as showing life prior to health and safety, as well as for the crazy and curious details some contain with other miscellaneous happenings that kind of struck me enough to post the articles to Twitter, despite not having too much relevance to Scotland necessarily. These are worldwide topics, and they didn't have any real connection to the projects that I was working on and researching at the time. I just happened to have come across them by the way, kind of thing. So we'll get into them, shall we? What we're going to do here is we're going to do a lucky dip of newspaper articles to really mix them up a wee bit, because while I'm doing the researches, I'm obviously coming up with the same kind of terms and things. So we'll mix them up even further. So to that end, I have all of the newspaper titles and dates of the articles. So today we're going to start with the Glasgow Courier for the 2nd of February 1854. See what this has. Well, we had an explosion in a previous episode, an explosion on board a train. This is slightly different. It just shows how easy it was to obtain gunpowder, apparently. So it's entitled Explosion of Gunpowder in Molina. On Monday night, about 12 o'clock, a very considerable excitement and alarm was created in Knox Street by the explosion of a large quantity of powder in the house of Mr. Ritchie, the proprietor of the Tyrawley Herald. It appears that one of his servant maids by some means obtained possession of the key of his powder store, and, when the family had retired to rest, abstracted some 5 pounds weight of powder, which she brought into the kitchen. The powder was in a loose state in a tin vessel, and attracted the attention of another maidservant, who inquired what it was, and being told that it was turnip seed, she remarked that it was a very curious-looking seed, and took the candle to examine it more closely, when it ignited with a tremendous explosion. The woman was dreadfully burned, but the innocent far more so than the other, so that she is not expected to survive. The kitchen window was completely blown out and shattered, as was also the window of a detached building, the infant schoolroom, which was a few yards distant, and almost every window in the rear of the house shared the same fate. Fortunately, the size of the kitchen window and the door, which was open, afforded a readier exit for the expanded air than otherwise would have been the case. The repercussion carried away a large portion of the railing of the stairs leading for the kitchen, and the entire of the lobby window, and broke several panes in the window of a front room in the 3rd story, the door of which happened to be open. The unfortunate women were removed to the workhouse infirmary by Mr. Devlin, who was called up to attend them immediately after the occurrence of the accident. It is said that the powder was intended for a sweetheart who wanted to amuse himself fowling during the snow. That's from the Connaught Watchman, and reported in the Glasgow Courier, 2nd of February 1854. Yeah. So, I don't believe that maid thought for a second that it was turnip seed. Had she thought that it was just seed, she wouldn't have waited for the family to go to bed before somehow acquiring the key to the powder room. She's going to have known what that room stored just by having worked in the house at all. Then at the end it said that the powder was intended for her sweetheart who wanted to go fowling, so shooting fowl. So she knew it was gunpowder. So really the only question is, why did she allow her colleague to go near it with a candle? That I have no idea. And I would probably think that she's accountable for all that. I mean, for murder, really, since it says that the innocent girl isn't expected to survive. So I don't know that she was done with murder. I would hope so, because that was murder. She knew what she had. Okay, on to the next. Okay, chunky one. Oh my goodness, okay. So this is a 3-parter. We start with the Edinburgh Evening News for the 19th of September 1905, going on to the Montrose, Arbroath and Brechin Review and Forfar and Kincardineshire Advertiser for the 22nd of September 1905, finishing with the Edinburgh Evening News for the 28th of May 1906. I don't remember any 3-parters, so this is interesting. Find out what this has for us. So I do remember why there are 3 articles. I remember this one, but the first actually starts with a completely unassociated story. So we start with Paisley Engineer's savagery. At Paisley Sheriff Court today, a Paisley engineer named Alexander Hunter was sent to prison for 60 days for biting a hawker on the nose. It was stated that Hunter was assaulting his wife when the hawker took the woman's part. Hunter then got hold of the hawker and bit him on the nose so savagely that 5 stitches had to be put in it. Which is just barbaric. I mean, you don't bite anybody, especially their face. Like, that's... Anyway, now we come on to the story that's led to there being 3 separate papers worth of articles here. So it begins with Boy's extraordinary railway journey. While a railway official at Preston Station this morning was examining an express from Liverpool, he was surprised to find a small boy sitting on the brake apparatus beneath one of the coaches. He is aged 10 years and lives at Seacombe, Birkenhead. The boy was under the impression the train was going to Huddersfield, where he has an aunt. And those stories are taken from the Edinburgh Evening News for the 19th of September 1905. We then have Boy's Journey of Peril, trying experience under a carriage. Stanley Condor, 10 years old, of Liverpool, had an exciting ride from Liverpool to Preston on Wednesday under a carriage. When a railway employee went to oil the brakes and wheels of the Liverpool to Scotland Express on the London and North Western Railway, he found the boy stretched at full length on the brakes underneath one of the carriages. He was dragged out, and when questioned by the railway officials, he explained that he had run away from home and was trying to reach Huddersfield, where he has an aunt. He had ridden from Liverpool to Preston under the carriage. If he had not been discovered and had succeeded in clinging to his perilous position, he would have been carried to Carlisle before the train stopped again. The railway officials were astonished that he had been able to hold on, as the train frequently attains a speed of 60 miles an hour. The boy was turned over to the police, who telegraphed to his father, and later in the day he was sent home. "I got behind the train at Lime Street Station when no one was looking," said Condor to a press representative last night. "It was dark, and I climbed on the iron bars and waited for the train to start. First there was a bit of shunting that nearly shook me off, but very soon the engine started and went quicker and quicker. I could not breathe at first, and gravel and dust filled my nose and eyes, but I shut them and leaned my face on my arm. Then the train begun to swing like boats do in rough weather, and I felt sick. I knew that if I got frightened and let go, I should be killed, so I held fast and tried to think of something. Very soon my arms got so tired and I got so thirsty that I thought I should tumble off, but I held on harder than ever. Then I got quite used to the rocking of the train and felt as if I would like to go to sleep. I nearly did once, but I was afraid of falling off, so I began to think of some tales I had read, and then, just when I felt comfortable, they came and found me. Sometimes when the train was going very fast, the wind and gravel made a noise like a lot of bees. What I didn't like most was going over the bridges and through tunnels. And that's reported in the Montrose, Arbroath and Brecon Review and Forfar and Kincardineshire Advertiser for the 22nd of September 1905, which is then continued. A youthful adventurer sent to a training ship is the title of the next one. The boy Stanley Condor, aged 11, was today before the police court at Liverpool on remand when he pleaded guilty to stowing away on the liner Victorian from New York to Liverpool. The deputy stipendiary magistrate had before him a report of the boy's recent journeyings underneath railway carriages and in other dangerous positions. At the beginning of this year, the boy was taken to Winnipeg by his father, who obtained work there. In 10 days, Stanley disappeared and, by stowing away in 3 different trains, reached Montreal. By the same method, he travelled to New York, where, after spending 3 days doing odd jobs which secured him food and shelter, he stowed away on the Victorian and was discovered when at sea. The magistrate said the boy's roving disposition might drift him into crime, though he had the making of a good man. With his mother's consent, he was sent to the training ship Clio at Bangor until he reached the age of 16 to be trained for the sea. And that's from the Edinburgh Evening News for the 28th of May 1906. And what? 11 years old? And he's like literally making his way from New York to Liverpool himself. I kind of wonder what happened to him in after years as an adult. I wonder if he became someone, because he had quite the childhood. We'll have one last one since that was a wee bit of a longer one. We have the Edinburgh Evening News for the 1st of March 1906. Alright, this is an article that struck me for obvious reasons, I think. It's entitled Great Britain and the Opium Traffic. Mr. Joshua Rowntree Scarborough addressed the Edinburgh Young Scots Society last night in the Protestant Institute, George IV Bridge, on the opium trade. Is Great Britain or Japan right? Mr. D. McLean, solicitor, presided over a good attendance. Mr. Rowntree said the question was somewhat typical of the great divergence of thought between the East and West, and it assumed special significance as between the thought and action of Great Britain and Japan. The Japanese had formed an extremely strong opinion that opium was a deleterious drug, and they would not on any account permit its importation into Japan. At present, there were only something like 1,330 pounds weight of opium permitted to enter Japan under extraordinarily strict conditions. It had to be prepared for medicinal purposes under government supervision and distributed under government supervision, and it came to this that 25,000 registered chemists in Japan were allowed to get each something like 6 teaspoonfuls of opium for purely medicinal purposes. The prohibition policy had also been carried into Formosa, an extremely opium-ridden country, and with a view to stopping the consumption altogether in Formosa in time, they had adopted even an educational system against the drug, and had taken extraordinary pains, according to the British consuls, with great results. Mr. Rowntree went on to remark that on the landing of Japanese troops in Korea, 6 Japanese soldiers found in an opium den were taken to the head of their regiment and shot. They would have no tampering with the opium. One contrasted that with the great imperial drug trade carried on by the Indian government, of course with the full responsibility of the British, for the last 100 years. Speaking of the habit, particularly as regarded China, he said China was beginning to see that if it was to follow Japan, they must cut off the opium supplies. Further, there was the lesson from the Transvaal, where the mine owners said that they must stop the opium habits among the coolies, purely and solely for the sake of efficiency of labour. New Zealand and Australasia had prohibited the traffic altogether, and now the East, in the person of Japan, in the new reform movement in China and all our colonies were opposed to the trade which had been so long promoted and nurtured by Great Britain. He appealed for the sake of our own place in the East, the position and influence of Great Britain in the East, that they ought to accept the best public opinion of the East and meet them, and bring this traffic, which was so injurious to the influence of Great Britain in the East, to as speedy an end as they could. Mr. Rowntree was cordially thanked for his address. And that's from the Edinburgh Evening News for the 1st of March, 1906. So, the West has been on a rather strong effort against drugs, the whole war on drugs thing. It seems like it took them a while to come to that conclusion. That Great Britain was responsible for promoting and nurturing the opium trade, and couldn't countenance why Japan might want it stopped. Is Great Britain or Japan right, they ask? Well, I think we know in hindsight that whatever we can do to minimise risk to people is the way forward, and that the war on drugs has failed hugely. So obviously the idea of educational devices in Formosa, teaching people, education is always the way forward, knowledge is power, etc. So I found that an interesting article, especially for as late as 1906, that Great Britain's only really just realised, oh, maybe we shouldn't be promoting and nurturing the opium trade, you know. But, well, there we go. And that's us for today. Some fairly different articles there. So we may see you next time for it.